Good morning, friends. It's January 27th, and I was pleased yesterday we got to have a little faculty meeting of SINU, Synergetics University. If you've never heard of it, check it out. Instagram, for example, good place to go find Synergetics University. All this wonderful posters summarizing, giving insights into a discipline. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say, but we could also call it a branch of knowledge, something like this, called synergetics, developed by one of the more well known at the time, anyway, futurists in the Americas, traveled around the world a lot, worked in India and other places. Domes, especially, right? The dome in Afghanistan gave him a lot of visibility, say, to the Russians, who then invited him to Moscow, where the dome behind Khrushchev and Nixon in this famous photographs are from what were called the kitchen debates, or maybe it's one debate in singular, I don't remember, but it was like who can provide the best living standards for like quote unquote housewives or whatever. Who creates the best domestic scene? And it was the typical stereotypical capitalist versus communism, kind of, how economists tend to talk, kind of one dimensional, if you've read Marcuse. Anyway, I'm talking about Buckminster Fuller, of course, geodesic dome guy, and then the Montreal Expo 67. Again, he saw that in his kind of in a straight line or crooked line to mean something similar. There was U.S. versus USSR polarity, you could call it. And synergetics is a lot about polarities and spinning spheres, but they don't just, when you spin a sphere, you need an axis for that. And then you get an equator, you get a corresponding great circle. So a lot of his math philosophy is starting with polyhedra and then spinning them and getting networks of great circles. The icosahedron, if you spin it, you get 31 great circles. The cuboctahedron, if you spin it, you get 25 great circles. And you can superimpose these two networks. And because of the jitterbug transformation, you can actually transform the 25 into 31. You can also use the crisscrossings of the 31 and 25 to define additional axes and keep going. It's very much a spherical approach, and no wonder he came up with the domes, right? Which in retrospect, his detractors are like, oh no, it's not original. Someone else came up with it, domes. But, my attitude is great minds think alike. Same with the isotropic vector matrix. Alexander Graham Bell was into that. You would hope, right? You would hope that more than one human had access to the generalized principles, we could put it that way. So then he wrote this whole book, but he was, this guy was really into language. Sometimes he talked about universe. He used the capital universe as a proper name, as everything anyone had ever said about the universe, or just said it all. Any communication, all the sum total of human to human communications to date, right? Anything we can count as a communication, add all those up, and that's universe, which is kind of cool because that's kind of stretching or stressing both the word verse, right? It's like it's all one big poem. Everything we say, all that humans have gabbed about for thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, if you want, that's going to be universe. And it morphs, it changes, right? It changes quickly with evolution, with the invention of new artifacts, appliances, devices come along, and the language changes. And he was interested in using that as leverage. What devices and artifacts can I produce that will change the universe? And that sounds, well, you can't change the universe. Well, no, in alignment with the universe, What can we do to improve matters? It's a very logical, deep question. Another logical, deep question is there enough in principle? Like, if we're really trapped in a space where there's only enough resources to sustain a minority, maybe a tiny minority of the people, then our behavior is going to be governed a certain way by that knowledge. And he talks a lot about Malthus and traces the history there. And you get like Prouty here talking about how that was taken to heart by the elites. It's like, yeah, there's not enough. That's what Malthus seemed to show, or there won't be enough eventually. So we have to be cruel. We have to be vicious. We have to like make sure that we're on top at the end of the day. And most people are just going to have miserable lives and suffer more than we will. That was kind of the elitist attitude that permeates a lot of thinking to this day. And he was like, well, let's take another look at this. And, actually, sustainability is a possibility. And, today it's common to say abundance, but let's just say if there's enough, then the way a lot of elites behave is psychotic, right? If there is enough, then people who think according to the Malthusian model are psychotic. And AI psychosis is big these days. So psychotic is kind of normal now because of AI in part. I would say everyone's psychotic to some degree, right? Like we used to say in Est, the crazy people are the ones who got caught, right? You know? So I wanted to talk about belief systems a little bit. Big time in today's discourse, in today's universe, is the Bayes rule, the Bayes theorem. And what does it mean? What are people talking about here? And really, it's very simple if you just say it in plain English. It's like your worldview so far is called your priors. Like what you believe now, up till now, we call that theta, for example. And then stuff happens, right? We call that data, like your world. It keeps being a source of new information or data. Stuff happens, right? Now, what's the likelihood, given this data is happening, or actually, given your worldview, what's the likelihood of this data? In other words, given your beliefs, say that we're in the end times, you believe that, and then this other stuff happens that seems to take us away from that. Like the world starts to improve, people are like getting happier, and it seems like we're not heading into Armageddon. That's a threat to you, to your belief system, because you're just looking for the end times, and it's like Book of Revelation says, and where are the three horsemen and this kind of thing. And so if the data coming out isn't in alignment with your beliefs, the likelihood of the data given your beliefs will seem quite low. Like, hey, I believe this, but if in light of my beliefs, if my beliefs were true, what's the likelihood of the world going the way it's going, right? And maybe you need to shift your beliefs a little bit, rationalize it. It's like Armageddon isn't going to be this year, it's going to be next year. Now I get it. And in the Subgenius, we kind of play around with that, right? We have X Day, and we have an apocalyptic rhetoric around that, and it's kind of a spoof because every year, gathering for X Day, it's when we get abducted by the aliens, whatever. But it's a metaphor for the end of the world as we know it, so forth. And then it never happens, and there's rhetoric already built for there's a climax of expectant waiting for the aliens to come, and then they don't, and then it's like, well, we have an explanation. And it sounds kind of phony, fake on purpose because we're making fun of belief systems and how they work, how you patch them up to where no matter what happens, you can kind of fit it into your shoe, for example. You can try to shoehorn all that happens into your belief system up to a point, and then when you can't do that anymore and your head explodes, your belief system falls apart, that's when you get a lot of free energy, as they call it, right? Free energy is kind of a metaphor for, okay, all those beliefs have come unraveled. What are you going to do with kind of this new freedom you have that now that your beliefs have all been exploded and it's time to recreate? Well, you'll have the energy now. You've freed it up from the old belief system to invest in a new belief system. It's kind of like cashing out. Okay, I don't believe that anymore. You trade in your old car for your new car, whatever. You've got some free energy based on the rubble of your previous belief system to invest in a new belief system and get more back in alignment with the data. So then the other side of the Bayes equation is basically, okay, what is the probability of my belief system being true given all the data so far? So given life as I know it so far, what are the chances that I'm right about stuff? Right? So you can think in terms of being right. Again, in the S training, it was like, what's the most reactivating thing? What gets people going is being wrong, because they hate that, right? It's terrible to be wrong and have other people even know that you're wrong. That's even worse. And that gives you a lot of motivation, which we could call free energy, to get your beliefs back in order again, right? So now let's talk about how Fuller models thinking. Obviously, as a sphere, because that's what he's into. It's like you can look at it from the inside, from the outside, think of angles, think of world maps, right? And he also liked to think globally. He was the one who invented think globally, act locally. And, he credits going to a naval academy. What he learned at Harvard was kind of disappointing. He flunked out of Harvard. You could say, I say he was disillusioned by Harvard, because he started to encounter what all his life he would realize was over specialization. Like, how did professors get so narrow minded? He was asking. This is horrible, really. And then he got to the Naval Academy, and people were thinking and training him to think more globally. And another thing to remember is how much he spent on time on ships, and radio was just coming along, right? He lived to see the invention of radio and how that affected universe, our way of talking. Frequencies, right? Very important that all these messages going around, communications, they were on different frequencies. And these frequencies might be encrypted, it's like, and they might jam other frequencies. There's a whole warfare around frequencies. There's propaganda too, where you try to adjust other people's thinking, with polemics in some way. And by propaganda, I mean like advertising, I mean like sermons, really. I think propaganda, it used to be a good old Catholic term. You could be the minister of propaganda, and it just meant spreading the Catholic dogma. Dogma was an okay term. You go to catechism, you learn the dogma, and you learn to propagate it. You're a propagandist for Christianity, for Catholicism, whatever. And to this day, people who stand behind a pulpit and thump the Bible or whatever they thump, that's propaganda, I would say, advertising. And I do it, right? Like we had this meeting yesterday, I was saying, with the Sinu. There used to be a listserv called Sinel, Synergetics listserv, but now Sinu, which is way cool, as I was saying, and I was being somewhat polemical, and I'd say so, I'd rant. And the Quakers, I'm a Quaker, we talk about the ranters. The quietists and the ranters. The quietists just want to sit there and be quiet and worship and wait for God. But then maybe God comes in to your thinking and imbues you with this feeling you've got to say something, and you're almost shaking. You might be shaking. That's why you're called a Quaker. And you can't help yourself, and you stand to your feet and you rant and you propagate. And you might be affecting the beliefs of others around you to some degree. It's like in the Bayesian picture, it's not like your priors are overhauled every second or something. It's like there are minor adjustments always being made as the data flows in. And your assessment of the power of your own belief system that comes out the other end, if it's going up and down, you have to change your priors. In other words, your posterior becomes the new prior for the next cycle. It's kind of like an OODA loop. In other words, what I believed yesterday is a basis for what I believe today. But now what I believe today, well, today is now yesterday because life goes on. So now it's tomorrow, right? So yesterday I believed this. What's the likelihood I'll keep believing this, right? Well, we go through this loop. We adjust our thinking. And so when a guy gets up, or a gal, a person, and fulminates or pounds the desk or says whatever, it could be very calm communication. It could be very, very calm. It doesn't have to be a sermon, but I'm just saying, rhetoric, we should think about that. And the question is, with the synergetics that we're all into, what forms of rhetoric are going to be the most useful and helpful? And I think Bucky might say, oh, it's not about rhetoric, it's about devices. But then we talk about, rhetoric has its own devices. Like language is a tool, right? Language itself is a device, it's a tool. So what do we do in language to help, foster what look to be post-Malthusian attitudes, where we're not at each other's throats so much? He always talked about admirals on the left side trying to sink the admirals on the right side. It's like, it's a ridiculous picture, right? We're all on the same spaceship, and yet we're aiming missiles at each other as if that's addressing our existential condition, which is to be on a sphere, all sharing one big ball, and yet we're at each other's throats. Why? Because we're psychotic, right? It's all simple. And then how do we sort of improve how do we get more sane? That's the question. Instead of spaceship Earth, think of mental hospital Earth, right? And maybe there's a small sort of semi-sane faculty, and it's like, what do? We have these faculty meetings. It's like, how do we get more sane? Ourselves, people around us, what kind of rhetoric, what kind of advertising, what kind of propaganda? So back to Bucky, back to synergetics, the sphere of relevance that he talks about, the frequency that he's on or anyone's on, and there are trillions of frequencies in principle. Think of radio again. It's like sandwiched between what he calls two twilight zones, or the twilight zone. That which is more macro to what you think, and that which is more micro to what you think. In other words, the frequency that you're at could be stretched where you could take in more macro thinking, and that would expand your thinking. But you also need precision, attention to detail, and so on. And you don't know sometimes, like given your beliefs, are these details, this little micro stuff, this nitty gritty, is this really going to matter? Is this important? Should I be paying more attention to that? And there's this twilight zone of maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Like twilight zone of going into the more detail. And then there's a twilight zone of the more macro, like these larger considerations, say about superpower politics or, the Malthusian paradigm, these sort of macroeconomics, we call it. That might stretch your mind to think in another frequency at some point, depending if you find the twilight zone actually has relevance for you. So you could say the twilight zone is adjacent belief systems, or what you could believe tomorrow, but today it seems a little bit surreal that you would believe that. But by tomorrow you believe it, right? Because you went to a certain church of the subgenius, and somebody was telling you about X day, and the aliens are coming, and now you're thinking, oh my God, the aliens are coming, right? Except you don't really believe that, but I'm using like a model of propaganda and how people change their beliefs and all this kind of psychology. And Applewhite, friend of mine, and Bucky's, he said he was into synergetics largely for the psychology. Why? Because he was a cyborg guy, right? He's a CIA dude, right? And his whole life was about competing belief systems and so on. And being factual is part of it. If your belief system depends on lying to people about everything, obviously it's got a very short half-life because it'll be easy to poke holes in it. It'll fly apart in short order, or maybe it'll take a while. So that's another thing about belief systems. In my belief system, is that they all have a half-life. They decay over time. Now, if they're actively maintained, as per active inference, if we're actively maintaining our beliefs, it's like keeping it maintained, cleaning your house, doing house cleaning. Okay, it's going to last longer. But basically, the trend is entropy is such that belief systems leak. None of them are perfect, and they go towards nonsense. So that's where we're heading if we don't maintain our belief system, or if too much countervailing information is coming in to explode our minds, explode our belief system, giving us a lot of free energy. That's kind of like the end of a belief system, right? The star explodes. But really, sustainable belief systems is the norm. You wake up believing what you went to bed believing, usually, right? With slow changes over time, like gaining weight, losing weight, kind of that kind of slow. Like a clock is slow, the hour hand. So I'm not thinking of beliefs as something that, change radically often. They don't have to usually. We make sure they don't because it's a lot of work. And being wrong can be painful, right? So anyway, I just wanted to roll that all up into a big ball. Stuff about Bayes' theorem, active inference, kind of OODA loop, things I didn't mention the OODA loop, but that whole idea that you're always revising and orienting and acting. You act sometimes just to test your beliefs, right? It's why you go to a subgenius devival or something to hear people fulminate and see if you can resonate. Praise Bob, right? So I resonate with a lot of the Bucky stuff and I propagate it. And sometimes I fulminate. You could say almost like I preach, I rant. And I was saying that yesterday. I was doing a fair amount of ranting during the meeting because, again, I think polemics has a role. It always has. Rhetoric, advertising. I think what we're looking for are really pithy little, you could call them ads, little pithy little message givers. And I think Casey's posters are kind of like that. Each one encapsulates a little insights into the synergetics way of thinking, and each one is impactful because they're pretty and they're easy to look at, and you can sort of absorb the information painlessly. So check it out, Instagram. Have a good time learning about synergetics. My channel has a ton of stuff. I've got websites. There's Amy Edmondson's book. Don't stop with that though. If you want to really get into it, you got to really dive into the beast modules. And I'm really telling you, that's when I get introduced to a person as someone who's into Bucky. I really want to know: have they done anything to learn about these A, B, T, E, S modules? Have they? If it's all just about domes for them, you kind of know a superficial amount, really. Domes are not the whole thing with Bucky. Don't think that. All right. Talk to you later.